Hello and good evening to this evening's edition of Off the Shelf with my co-hosts Mehran Javid, Rehard Bradford and Fahim Shakur. Hi guys.
Hello.
Evening.
Hi, Zubair.
So this is our monthly book club, which has been virtual for over a year now. We meet on the last Sunday of the month for about an hour or so to discuss different books from different members of the team, and they are available on YouTube and Facebook Live. We have some rules as always, as anything. Regular viewers will know about the reason that for these, but just to kind of make them clear once more in terms of being available and open to all. So this month's book is by a famous author, Michael Crichton, entitled State of Fear. So Michael Crichton, MD, was for me one of my favorite authors growing up. He is felt to be one of the fathers of a genre called techno thriller, which admittedly I'd not come across before. I just thought it was a science fiction thriller writer when I used to read his books, but that's just one of those things. He's well known for writing ER and Jurassic Park, but he's written a large number of books actually, and a lot of them have been very successful and made into movies over the years. Himself, he trained as a doctor at Harvard Medical School, very prestigious place, but informed his dean in his final year that he'd rather research a book than interpret ECGs, which is quite brave of him. And initially, he wrote under a pseudonym called of Geoffrey Hudson, who was a 17th century court dwarf, sort of a reflection of his humor, really, given that he himself was 6'9" in height. He sadly passed away on the 4th of November in 2008, so 13 years, I believe, next month. But the book that I'm reviewing today is State of Fear, which to me was probably his most controversial work, I would say, and probably one of his longest works as well. Sorry, guys, I know it's almost 600 pages plus, but I know some editions do have it almost at 800 pages, so I do apologize for the longevity of the book, but hopefully it was worth the read. So State of Fear is based on different characters around the world, but mainly in the US. There's a billionaire environmentalist called George Morton, who sadly passes away in his Ferrari, or is presumed rather to have died in a Ferrari car crash, just before he's about to make a substantial donation to an environmental group. This leads to his lawyer, Peter Evans, to delve into his understanding himself of climate change. It involves a conspiracy, involves acts of terrorism against children and families in the US, but also to islanders in remote parts of the world. There's an attempt to manipulate the weather, which is quite high tech in terms of its scientific reach. And Crichton portrays the environmental body quite interestingly through a chap called Nicholas Drake as being quite negative and really quite irrational and dogmatic, I would say. And the scientist, the person with hard data and journal references, is a chap called John Kenner, who's very much a climate change skeptic. So given the present feeling around climate change and it being a scientific consensus that actually is a real thing, it is quite interesting to read the book to see actually how he's portraying his appreciation of climate change. At times, I felt as though he was trying to justify his position about what he felt climate change was all about. And he did it through the bit that made more sense to him. He did it through writing a book. He could have done it through a journal of some description, but he did it through a book because I guess he was a master of writing. His book, though, has been held as proof, though, of the dangerousness of the climate change lobby. So there's a feeling from some people that maybe the climate change lobby is really quite powerful and strong, and maybe a bit dangerous and unhinged, I would say. And he's been quoted and referenced by US senators and others as a result. So in this regard, there are a number of individuals and groups and scientific organizations that maybe feel his work is rather quite dangerous, and his view that he's portrayed in the book is quite dangerous too. Interestingly, the book depicts fast cars, it depicts private jets and submarines and huge conferences with huge international individuals attending. But there's very few references towards bikes and walking. Although I must confess there was one reference towards adopting a sort of vegetarian diet and relying less on meat. So interestingly, given how individuals that you think were involved with environmentalism within the book weren't really adopting a very environmentally friendly lifestyle. Crichton justifies his position about how he felt about climate change. He talks about it at length in different videos that you can access on the internet, where he talks about climate change and how he came to his position over many years. One of his arguments is that it's really actually a phase. It's just a fashion. It's not really science. It's just people have just got to this bandwagon of climate change. It will pass, as all fashions do, and fade in time. And that's when true science will prevail. That's when the reality of what it's actually about will prevail. His references, though, have been picked and picked by different journalists and different environmentalists, and they talked about the pros and cons of his articles. And the feeling really is that maybe he's been very much cherry picking in the way he actually quotes his references. I chose his book. Also, we all know about, well, we probably know about COP26 happening, which starts tonight in Glasgow. Which is aiming to tackle the climate crisis. Whether you agree or not is another matter, but it's aiming to do so. And some of the attendees are fired with enthusiasm. And much like the convention that Crichton described, we've also got a feeling of impending doom right now around this conference too. We've had members of the royal family talking about a dangerously narrow window of opportunity to address the climate crisis in these next few weeks. And the past few months and weeks, we've had the fires in Greece and Turkey. We've had the damage they've caused. We've had floods. We've had the floods in Yorkshire right now and the Lake District that have caused devastation. And even today, I was reading about attendees being stranded at Euston Station due to the issues with the rail service from severe storm damage. Although some would just say it was just a tree that fell the line. I'll end with a quote from Alexander Smith, who was from Glasgow itself, and maybe he was describing Glasgow, but maybe this holds true for the world in its entirety. I sat and watched an endless plain, blackened beneath the gloom of rain, or fair that lightly sprinkled waste. And maybe that's what we're looking for, given how people feel about climate change. Anyway, that's enough about me and my take. We'll go on to the questions and discussion points. I'll start off first of all, because we're all medics here. We've all chosen, rightly or wrong, to become doctors of some description. But Michael Crichton didn't do that. He obviously got his degree, but he earned millions. I think in one of his divorces, he had to give his wife $100 million as recompense. Are we all happy with our careers, or should we have chosen literature instead? Fahim, go on, you start.
Some difficult questions. They put me on the spot with that one. I guess I'm not as talented as him, obviously. So that I think that comes to, you got to eat humble pie, and if you're good at something, then you develop your pursuit of that interest and doing that. He is very good. He was very good at writing books and had the medical knowledge as well. That's not easy to translate. Not everyone can do that. He could do it, but it's few and far between. But actually, it links in well, and I think it's part of it is the American style, where they have first a degree and then you move on to medicine, which is different to the UK style. Here, generally you go into it straight away unless you've had to do another degree. But in the USA, you can't do that. So you perhaps develop a more interest in the humanities and other things, and that might make it easy. But that's just me trying to explain why he's so good, I guess. Some people are just good at this, and but yeah, obviously it makes sense to go into it if you are.
Is there ever a right time to go into literature? I wonder, because you always feel that if you write things, you probably never make enough to kind of make a living. But he obviously has proven that you can do. Anyway, I'll leave that one alone.
But I think you're talking about a guy who's quite driven, isn't he? So he used to write essays, and I think he felt actually very criticized. I think he actually felt very much misunderstood when he was doing, I think, a degree in literature in the 60s. So there was a point that he actually wrote George Orwell essay, and then whoever marked it gave him a B-. So that kind of confirmed that, whoever was assessing him actually had no clue whatsoever.
Well, I suspect someone who is so creative and able to think for himself and to challenge the orthodoxy at the time he was learning medicine wouldn't be welcomed. He upset a lot of people.
It might still upset people even now, I imagine. We've not done a genre before of techno thriller or scientific thriller before. Did you guys enjoy that concept? Because I know we've done other books that have tackled things like grief and other things, but was this one of the, because not for him, you mentioned that you've not read Crichton's books before, and I think Brad, maybe you mentioned the same thing to me. Although you've watched his movies, you watched Jurassic Park and the like. Did you get the book after reading the book? Did you feel like you'd read more?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd explained it to you. I thought it was like Dan Brown as well, his style, in how he brought in science as well. But yeah, it would want me to go back and read Jurassic Park and so on, but I'm probably of that generation where the film came to me because I was so young at that stage. I hadn't got hold of the book. I think it would have been quite hard for me to have read the book at the time when it first came out. Would have been beyond my reading age, I think. But now, going back, I think it makes a lot of sense to reread these things.
Yeah, no, it's a real page turner. I guess the first thing foremost is that he's chose a really powerful theme, which is climate change. So it's, everyone needs to have an opinion on it. So he kind of already engages the audience. And then the way it flips from one location to the next, it's very much, it's not the bog standard places. It takes you to very remote and quite interesting, names of places like Papua New Guinea, et cetera, et cetera. So it's, I thought that was quite interesting. And he leaves very much for the reader to try and fill in the blanks, so that there is a fair bit of suspense and things that just happen out of the blue. I'm sure there's going to be lots of spoiler alerts during this discussion.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it's interesting how each chapter is quite short, and he's had lots of these books made into a film or a movie. So maybe it's written in that style. But as you said, it's real page turner, really gripping. The main character is a bit like a Bond character, I think. He's all over the world, and he kind of can do everything and know everything. It's brilliant, very entertaining book.
It is. Although I don't think this was based on the movie, has it? From what I got, I tried to find a movie that was based on this, but I couldn't find anything that should be. I don't think.
I'm very surprised if it was.
Anybody got a favorite passage or favorite quote that they want to share with the viewers?
I was very amused by the actor Ted when he gives his big speech to the children in the forest about how important the trees are, how they've been around forever, and they're the spirit of the world and all this sort of stuff. And then he's taken aside and told, well, actually, these trees didn't exist 11,000 years ago because North America was under an ice age and there were no trees. I thought that was a brilliant rip take out of celebrities getting onto causes and standing there as a mouthpiece and actually not having a clue what they're talking about, really. I thought that was really, really, really well done.
But it sounded well, though, when he actually read it, he thought, this sounds so nice, and it's about trees that have been there for so long. And it's very flowery, but maybe it's not quite based in reality. It's more romanticism than more scientific fact. How about you, Mary? Anything particular that stuck out or anything that you thought, I really enjoyed that quote?
I think there's lots of interesting quotes, especially towards the end of the book. But something that really got the conversation going was, I think it was on page 96 when he challenges Peter Evans, saying, when you have a strongly held belief, do you think it's important to express that belief accurately? So I think it's a case that, if it's okay to believe, but you need to be able to explain and rationalize as to why you believe certain things. So it's kind of gave me food for thought, and always challenging the the status quo to some extent.
I actually, my favorite bit was the bit that said Gulf Stream environmentalist. That struck out to me, because the one thing that really is my bugbear is that sometimes I feel that maybe those at the strongness of making a change actually need to look at themselves and think, well, what's my carbon footprint like? And I may be doing a lot more than maybe a lot of other individuals that maybe don't take a plane ever, or maybe walk to work, or maybe bike to work. Maybe they're doing far better than I am. But I've not come across that term before, and maybe you guys have, but I hadn't come across that term before I read the book. But I quite like that quote. Okay. Anybody had a favorite character, or thought maybe I can see myself as being that person, and it sort of became, thought actually I feel I really got infinited towards Kenner, or maybe to Peter Evans.
Was that an inkling for me? I think Peter Evans, I could relate to him just because, the way that he kind of sees life to some extent, and he wasn't really committed. He saw a job as a function and tried to meet those functions, but then the way he evolves as the passage progresses was quite interesting. So you could see that Peter Evans, a lot of readers would find themselves a bit like that, or I guess he's purposely designed Peter Evans to be that reader. And to educate, and I guess John Kenner is Michael Crichton, kind of, given that sophistication, all that information. So
to George Morton's money, but maybe not his age. But I quite like Kenner, though. Although I didn't agree with him, I must confess, I did feel as though he was being particular about who he quoted. I did like the fact that, like you said, he was Michael Crichton. I thought he was sort of the person who had the facts, and he was rational, and he kind of didn't bother with all the emotive side of things. Just said, these are how things are, and it was very effective and efficient, thwarting all those threats. How about yourself, Fahim? Any particular persons that you felt?
Yeah, obviously Peter Evans. Obviously, even the female characters. I think sometimes you can relate to what they think, even though you're a different gender and so on. So Sarah, obviously, the investigative bits and so on, I thought was quite interesting. So yeah, there's a lot of relatable characters. And so yeah, even if someone's of a different gender, different ethnicity, I think you can relate to them. They've got the human qualities that come out, and so they're probably the two for me.
Yeah, I'd agree with what's been said. Kenner's the guy who you wish you could be, because he's the hero. He knows everything, can do everything, totally resourceful, absolutely amazing. So he's the fantasy hero. But Evans is, as Maron said, Evans the guy, which is the same as you. You're reading the book and he's kind of working it out, and he's having his thoughts challenged, and he's seeing things happen that he doesn't understand, and gradually everything unfolds for him. So yeah.
I like the way he actually grows as well, because he seems like he's quite wimpish, if I can say it like that. But as the book goes on, he kind of becomes quite, affirmative. He becomes quite brave in the way he approaches different things. He's obviously reacting to his comfort zone, but he really kind of grows throughout the book. So well done to you for growing. I thought we just jumped onto the nitty-gritty really, because the book is about climate change, amongst other things. And I thought it would be good to see what you all thought maybe about climate change before you read the book, and whether it changed as a result of the book and thought differently afterwards. So shall I start with Fahim?
Can you hear okay, everyone? Yeah. It's just coming a bit correctly for me. Do you want to go ahead, Maron? I couldn't hear that bit.
All right. Okay. Yeah. No, I think it was just asking about views on climate change before and after reading the book. I guess I've always kind of been sitting on the fence with the whole issue of climate change. I think we're very much a connected world at this moment in time. So everything that happens in one corner, the other corner knows about it. So it's, whether the kind of catastrophes or the change in climate is happening or not, I guess the interventions are important, given that, we're very much a consumerist society, and huge amount of industrialization, huge amount of growth, and loss of resources. Something needs to change. So I guess that's my perspective before, and I guess even after. It just makes you realize that this is a debate that's going to be very difficult to address, because it's not a debate that you'll come in with an open mind of trying to be convinced otherwise. So I think people can sometimes make an impression of individuals if they actually hold the opposite belief. So it's one of those polarizing topics.
How about yourself, or anything particular that you're going on in the book on climate change?
Yeah, so we're talking about views on climate change before and after reading the book. I mean, my view is more to do with scientific consensus, really, and how that is. That's what's obviously going on in how I was thinking about it. And after the book, obviously, you do question yourself, I guess, a bit because of the so many things that are pulled out, the references and so on. So to me, I think it made me maybe just a bit more critical about everything that's been told to us. And I guess maybe that's the point of the book in some ways, is so that we can actually question ourselves a bit more. So I wouldn't say my views change, but I'm more open to other views now, is what I would say. And maybe that's the point of a good book.
Thoughts, Ray? Has it changed anything? Sorry, you're on mute, Ray.
I read this book several years ago, so I've subsequently read lots of stuff about climate change and books on geology, lots of different opinions. So having read it again, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think the way he makes people think and challenge the orthodoxy, what's presented in the media, what's been talked about in the press this week because the conference is happening. I think that's a really valuable thing, that people shouldn't just listen to what the media are telling them they should think. There's a lot of very good geologists, scientists who will debunk a lot of what we're told. There's a lot of podcasts out there now which are actually beginning to give a different opinion to this, but they don't get mainstream cover. You've got to go and search for them. You've got to look on the internet. You've got to listen to podcasts. So it hasn't changed my mind having read it again. It's just reminding me that you should have an open mind. And, if you're being told things by governments and it's become political, for some people it's become a religion, the whole climate thing. People have got a savior complex. We're going to save the planet, which is all very nice, well-intentioned, but how much of it's based in reality is something else. Yeah, and I think the book really, really encourages people to challenge what they're thinking and why.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's, I guess, for him, from your list of priorities, do you think climate change is right up there or the top one? Or do you think other priorities needs to be considered?
COVID is up there for me. COVID pandemic, COVID-19 is right up there for me. But climate change is there, and it's growing. It's hard to put a number where it is in your top 5 or top 10, whatever it might be for you. And that's because when you look at climate change, it impacts, and I know we were discussing this off air, from the size of your family to what you eat, the car you drive or not driving, how many holidays you take or not take abroad. It's the decision-making involved in climate change which makes it big on the priorities, because it's sort of influencing all parts of your life. When you look into, from diet to actually what you're doing and everything else, it's when you think about all of that, it's such a heavy part of your life, such a big part. That's why by definition, it's become high up on the priorities, because it's all encompassing. It's not just one thing. It's so many things that impact on the climate. So the concept of many different actions affecting the climate change is what's doing. And I think it's something that I think Greta Thunberg was saying today or yesterday, was something about it's never too late to do as much as you possibly can. And this has resonated with me. I know it's one of the sound bites she came out with at the COP26 just now. And in that sense, that's why, yes, I am worried about climate change, but I also like the way she looked at it. It's never too late to do anything, and it's what you can do. And so that gives me a lot of hope, because I may not have the resources to everything I want to do, and there'll always be a bit of guilt associated to what I can't do, but I still feel like I can do something.
The question I had was, if before you felt quite strongly about climate change and thought it was true, and there was no argument about it, if you read that book, did you feel differently afterwards? Did it actually change your, I won't say belief, but did it change your view really strongly from what it was like before for anybody?
I want to answer this one, Ray, and I can certainly give my views on it.
I didn't hear what Zuba was saying because my audio is a bit weird. Zuba speaking, I'm not hearing him properly. The same point about being worried about climate.
Yeah. I think
personally, I'm not worried at all. Because the climate always changes. It has always changed. The swings have been far more dramatic than what we're seeing now. and listening to what Fahim was just saying, Bjorn Lomborg's study suggests that even if we spend something like $87 trillion, will make almost no difference to the world temperature. So I think if we have any concern, it should be about where the priorities are and where huge amounts of money are being spent, because they could be spent much more wisely to improve the lives of people all over the world, as opposed to something which has become, from sort of warming to crisis to catastrophe to apocalypse to we've only got a week to sort it out and this is the last chance. I don't share those thoughts at all.
So, I guess for him, I know he gives a slightly different narrative, doesn't he, towards the end of the book? Kind of just reinstates what he stands for and why he's written the way he's written. Do you think other priorities like poverty is something that perhaps needs more urgent attention?
Yeah, I think poverty, obviously COVID-19, discrimination, there's so many things, equality, so many things that need urgent attention. But I don't think it's like you can't do many things at one go. You can obviously do lots at the same time. I don't think you have to just pick one and try and do it. But you do get a sort of compassion fatigue as well. I know that's sort of thing that academics talk about, where just because you're not able to do everything doesn't mean you can't do anything, but just because you shouldn't feel powerless that you can't do anything. But like I said, I think there's a lot of guilt, because when you really have to do all the things that are said to you, it's a very hard way of life. I'm still left with a feeling of guilt if I can't do all the different things. Yes, electric car is good. Not having a car is even better. You always feel like there's something more you could be doing, and that's what I struggle with myself in my inner self, really, with the whole climate change. But I want to do more, but maybe it's the low hanging fruit, the easy wins you can do, like, recycling and so on. That's quite straightforward. I think seems quite agreeable. I don't think people tend to have a problem with recycling in general. Eating seasonal food and not having it transported thousands of miles just because we want it doing, carbon emissions and so on. There's a lot of, I think, easy wins, but like Ray said, there's a lot of money that's needed to make huge changes, and we're not able to do that. So yeah, it's kind of feel like we're going round and round it like a hamster as well.
Yeah. So Ray, what are your thoughts about the title of the book itself, State of Fear?
I think it's very apt. I think through the theme of the book, and through the interview scenarios where they go into the room and discuss scenarios for the legal case, I think he very cleverly depicts the mindset of how the people who are on board the global warming catastrophe apocalypse agenda are trying to put across a certain message. And it is about fear. I was at the cinema 2 nights ago, and Amazon are sponsoring a little clip which has children stood in puddles and in catastrophic environments, and the wind's blowing, and there's little children looking sad and scared. So the state of fear is being ramped up to the maximum now. And there are reports of children having nightmares and becoming anxious and being really worried about their future. In a similar way, when I was young, it was going to be the nuclear apocalypse. We used to get shown a little TV commercial on an evening saying, take a door off and hide under the door when the nuclear explosion comes. And I think a lot of people were genuinely scared. There's still a threat of nuclear war at some point, never really gone away. But I think State of Fear is a really apt title.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I think it kind of resonates a lot from his childhood as well, because I think he was born and brought up around New York, Roslyn area. So it's a very, he has very positive memories in the sense that, kids would just play out. There would be no issues. There'd be no drugs. There'd be no violence. And then suddenly, fast forward a few decades, everything is not what you imagined it to be. So it's kind of the state of fear, or this, this dislike to the environment that he finds himself in. So I thought, and using that title to demonstrate that there is a state of fear, but should that state be existent? I thought that was, it's appropriately titled book. from my perspective. What are your thoughts, Fahim?
Yeah, I love the title. It's gripping, obviously, and we haven't talked about the cover itself. I'll show. Now that's a beautiful cover. Yes, I mean that's a fearful. I mean, red, obviously, we're programmed to think that's danger in society. That's fearful, and yeah, you're obviously left in this state of fear. I would agree with Ray. It's I've not seen the Amazon commercial, but this constant fear is perpetuated all the time in many different ways, and a lot of us are anxious at the moment. So. And there are things to be actually fearful about. So don't get me wrong. There are obviously things, but then sometimes things are a bit over-egged as well. So yeah, it's a perfect title, and it's a gripping title.
Great stuff. So there's quite a few mnemonics in this book. Nerf, elf. One of the things was about the PLM. What were your thoughts about that? Do you think that exists? I guess it's open to either of you.
I think it does. I think it definitely does.
Go on, Ray. You first.
I think the whole media, a lot of the media, definitely has a certain bias. It's a self-perpetuating message. And if anyone dares to question it, they're shouted down, they're belittled. It's ad hominem attacks. It definitely exists. And the question is, well, why? What is it they're getting out of it? And that's a harder question. But there's a huge amount of money involved. There's no doubt about that. The biggest motivation for a lot of things is money. I find it bemusing that a lot of the people who are on board with this, are claiming that they're there to help everybody. And save the planet, have no guilt whatsoever about flying to these meetings, wearing expensive suits, probably having their teeth whitened so they look good for the media and the press, and no embarrassment about it whatsoever. So they're there telling everyone else that don't use electric, walk everywhere, only eat vegetables. We have to live this very, very strict life, but it's fine for them to spend huge amounts of money on their media presentation and traveling and jetting all over the world. It's completely hypocritical.
I will say in their defense, though, Ray, that there have been about 500 people that voted today to COP26. And I believe the Dutch embassy sponsored some bikes between two of the stations to kind of get people across. So I think what I find is that there are well-meaning and well-intentioned people out there that I think take it seriously. But I agree with your point that maybe there's a few that are quite Gulfstream environmentalists. And I think we mentioned this before, it's my bugbear that, there are individuals that do push it. We had this fella Ted on sort of in the book. And there are other Teds in the world that we see that we've all come across who have pushed climate change quite strongly. But then the jetting go every week or so on the private jet. And it does seem a bit, I don't know, hypocritical, I think you would say. I mean, I guess I would argue otherwise, but it just seems a bit, it doesn't give you the same level of conviction that they're not following by their own principles in some ways. But I do take the point that they do that. But I think there's a number that actually do take it very seriously. And maybe we should try and listen to them a bit more as well. But maybe they're just blind believers. I think that's the issue for me. I think I'm still not entirely sure how true the science is in some ways. Although I do think that we're probably going a bit too far in some ways, like Meher mentioned, in terms of just being wasteful with our resources right now in some ways. But I think there's a lot to be said about how those that actually push the agenda. We don't do it too well. But the PLM thing I mentioned because I know in the past we've had Eisenhower mention the military industry complex and stuff like that. But obviously this is a new concept to me, a PLM. I'm not sure whether you guys had to come across it before. So do something different to kind of just relay how maybe people do influence what we say and what we do, and maybe we don't always have control over our own thoughts. The next bit I was going to mention was with regards to, because this for him, you mentioned this about scientific consensus. Because does that make us blind believers if we just go with a consensus? Or should we actually question everything we hear? Like, is the Earth round, for example? Does it go around the Earth? I mean, how far do you take it? Because there's flat earthers out there, there are people out there who believe the earth is the center of the world. There's all sorts of different opinions out there that are not with the scientific grain, if I can say that. Do we do the same with this as well? Do we just believe it because lots of people say it's true? Or do we question it and say, actually, no, it's not quite correct?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point. I mean, it comes back to what I was thinking is, you have to think, if you question something, are you questioning from a point of you really want the truth? Are you questioning to make yourself feel better? That's part of it as well. Because going back to what I said, to have a very pure life with being the environmentally and doing everything is quite hard, and there's guilt associated if you can't do it all and you feel that's the right thing. So yeah, I think questioning things is a good idea in general, but like you said, yeah, it's complicated how far, because it takes up a lot of brain space and memory as well. It's quite taxing on yourself if you're always questioning every single thing, and you rely on expertise on so many different things in all parts of your life. So why specifically just question this? Are you always questioning everything that happens? But if you're of that inquisitive mind, then maybe you are. I think personality trait will feed into how much you question things, your level of own curiosity. Obviously, the most innovative people are thinking outside the box and always questioning things, and the mainstream will go in one way. So, but yeah, I think it depends on how easy a life you want, I guess, to how much you want to do this, and how radical you want to be, sometimes going against the grain and questioning. But for me, like I said, yeah, I go back to scientific consensus. I mean, I grew up, back in the 90s, in Carter 94 was telling me on the CD that, global warming, there's a huge passage about it, and really it's just added and more. But going back to what Ray said, there does seem to be that fear that's been put into it, which I didn't have then. I don't think I had that level of fear in me about the climate change. But yeah, we're now 30 years down the lane, down the road as well. So maybe it's got worse in that sense. But yeah, I think the concept of climate change has always been there since I've been born. It's just with some of the weather changes and so on, it perhaps is becoming more real now.
Can I just ask, Ray, do you think there is scientific consensus with climate change? Do you think that actually, no, there isn't a consensus? There's actually two camps here that are equally weighted.
There's a consensus in most of the media. Sky, BBC, CNN, across the world. There is a consensus there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, on the other side, if you listen to podcasts, if you buy books, if you listen to Australian geologists, read some of the things they've brought out, then there's definitely a whole group of scientists who dispute most or all of what's been said. We all go to medical meetings,
yes,
and we have discussions about topics we all understand in our field, and there's always two sides to the story. You'll get people telling you diametrically opposite things about the same facts, because science isn't about consensus. Science is always about questioning and evolving and learning. And I think it's very worrying the minute someone turned around and says the science is settled, no more questions allowed. That should, as a scientist, that should be really worrying.
Yeah.
Because it's never settled. You can have a degree of probability that we think this is likely or more likely or most likely, but we've always got to be open to the possibility that we're wrong and things change. And the history of science is full of that.
Yeah.
It's often changing. So I've read quite a lot about this. And for me, one of the biggest things on the debate and the consensus that's given is generally everything is given since records began, which usually means since about 1850.
Yeah.
Which ignores all the climate that we've seen before. So when they put someone down and they say, oh, this winter was cold, we're all told that's just weather. That's not climate, that's just weather. But if you want to increase the time frame for 2,000 years, and then you go back to the medieval warm period, then the warming we've seen since 1850, since industrialization, which has happened, suddenly it's not so dramatic. And if you make the time frame even further, then the last 200 years is weather. It's not climate. So your reference points are really important. And I think the way it's been presented and the consensus that is portrayed in the media is extremely misleading.
Because I think I personally do share that concern that get to this sort of issue, that it's a bit dogmatic, I find at times with climate change, that some of the time you're just told to believe it and just accept it. And I think if you're being a scientist, then you should never do that. You should always question. because today's, scientific said it is tomorrow's, debunked scientific theory. And that's always happened. We've had that story for centuries, really. But it's difficult to know when this consensus become actually this is, you can't argue. There's so much data out there. There's so much evidence out there that you can't really debate this anymore. And it's hard because, like you mentioned, we don't have much data out there anyway. It's only started since we've only had data for about 2 centuries at the most, and that's not even complete data as well. It's just from a few places. Then gradually it spreads out towards Siberia and Antarctic and whatever else. So it is really hard, I think, for me to kind of say for sure that it is there. But on the flip side, there seems to be a lot of consensus from other sides. Maybe it does indicate that it does exist. So I think that's my issue that I've got. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm erring more towards that it is occurring. And I know what you're saying, Ray, but I just feel more maybe I'm just being swung by the volume of conversations that are occurring. Maybe that's what I'm maybe I should be reading more books instead.
I guess a bit. How much consensus do you need for something to be given the majority opinion? Because there's lots of data going around saying it's 97% of scientists agree that this is what's happening, but that's the best case scenario. And all the other surveys that the percentage is much lower, they don't get published. So,
well, the interesting thing, Marion, on the 97% of scientists agree that global warming is man-made, or whatever the phraseology is used, when that's been taken apart by certain groups, 97% of scientists agree that climate changes, which makes me wonder what the other 3% think is going on in the history of the world and the planet, which is a bit weird. But 97% of scientists agree that climate changes. But if you actually get down to the level of detail of, do they think anthropogenic change is the reason for the world warming up, that percentage drops dramatically, hugely. And that has never been, they've only taken out, the media have taken the bit they want. That's the most useful. I was reading some Greek philosophy this week, and they're saying in rhetoric, if your argument is crystal clear and good and based on truth, you don't need to use ad hominem attacks. You don't need to use rhetoric. You don't need to use drama and words to create emotion, because the evidence speaks for itself. And one of the Crichton's things at the end of the book there, the climate models, the error rates are horrific. And he says, really, we should only believe it if we've got 20 years of real time based on a climate model to show whether it's actually turned out to be true. I'm not sure we've got that. Clouds weren't in global modeling for a long time, but water vapor is one of the largest causes of retained heat on the planet. And it wasn't even in the modeling. And that's come to light in the last 5 years or so. So there's an awful lot is not discussed. It's just there's a message of crisis, catastrophe. You must do something now. That's why I don't like it.
I think that's part of the issue, isn't it? Because the whole thing about the priority aspect was, what you worry about. Climate change is really on top of my list. That's the issue. It never really has been. Whether I'm wrong or right is another matter, granted, but it never has been a major issue. And therefore, but you'll still recycle. Everybody recycles. Everybody still tries to kind of be sensible with what we have in terms of our resources. We're not really wasteful people, generally speaking, but it's just a case of saying, well, actually, should we be making dramatic life changes based on this threat, and are we the problem here? And I think it's difficult to kind of say that for sure. And like you say, Ray, if it was bond or clear, then you wouldn't have to really talk about an area flooding or something happening catastrophic to a part of the world. And we see what is in the model where it shows the UK and the sort of seabed taking over Preston and coming towards Salisbury and maybe not reaching Blackburn properly, but Preston being swamped. And you see that you start to really think, blimey, if that happens, good luck for him. But thankfully, maybe it is true, it may not be true, but we're not really sure. But that sort of stuff does worry you. But again, it's a case of, is this just rhetoric or is it actually based in truth? There was a part of the book that kind of made me think a bit, which was about his portrayal of village life and urban life. We had quite a graphic scene of cannibalism, didn't we? Where we had this celebrity who was, waxing lyrical about traditional lifestyles, and I've lived in a village before, and and kind of not really lived in a village, but kind of egged it on a bit. They had done, and then it's quite graphic. I don't want to kind of give too many details again, I think, over the internet, but kind of more about how he was eaten almost alive. What do you guys think of that side of things? Was that quite accurate from Mike Crichton? Or do you think it was a bit uncalled for? Go on, for him, you start.
Yeah, it is graphic. I won't spoil it for people who haven't read the book. I think we need to come up with a rating of like what age could read this book actually, because it is graphic. I think it's how I always struggle with these books when you've got one person trying to describe these sort of village sort of things, and it's done in a way as if it's thought to be sort of a prehistoric sort of civilization or medieval or backward, whichever word you want to use, but it's sort of portrayed in that way, and then the urbanized is meant in a better sort of a way. And I think what happens is with any book, the author puts some of their thought processes and belief systems into the book, and they're trying to persuade you, the reader, into it, because that's the purpose. So it's going to reinforce perhaps some lazy stereotypes of certain cultures and so on. If you've got let's call it what it is, cannibalism or other sort of graphic sort of things. I'm not saying it doesn't happen in any part of the world, but they're few and far between, aren't they? And obviously you have to remember these sort of things are quite graphic by the nature when you write about them, and sort of gory type of things. But how you relate to it, if you're looking for your understanding of a particular culture from a fiction book, I think then you're perhaps being a bit misled, if that's what you're looking for. It's the writer trying to narrate a story and give it some sort of issue, but I mean, we'll probably come into a bit later. I have some issue with some of the characters and the ethnicities that are portrayed as well, but that's a separate but slightly related point in terms of how you're portraying cultures, civilizations, and different groups of people. And yeah, I'm not sure what it added to what is already a very long book in my mind.
Isn't that the answer for him? The primitive approach of living, isn't that the answer to some of the questions with global warming? If you're thinking about urbanization and industrial growth, etc., you're just using nature's resources to provide shelter, security, etc., etc. So there's this difficult position that one finds itself. There's clearly an ideal, but then they also want to maintain the status quo. So I think there's this dance that commonly occurs throughout this book.
I think he's put that horrible scene in at the end purely as a dramatic tool to make the celebrity look foolish for claiming that a basic lifestyle is to be sought after, and that's the ideal. And he's played. I hadn't thought about this until you guys have put it in the slides. So I read just earlier tonight about the New Guinea tribes and the Kuru, the brain disease they had. The belief was that when your ancestors died, if you shared the body, you took on their spirit and you guarded their spirit and you looked after their spirit. So apparently within the tribes, it was the women who usually ate most of the body because they were able to protect and nurture the spirit better. And they give it to their children, and then the boys, particularly later on, would develop the brain disease. It was all about spirituality, and it was only done when someone in the tribe had died. So the way he's depicted it as a live act of cannibalism, that's just pure dramatic effect. It's not meant to portray anything other than total drama.
It's interesting though, because I obviously shared a few graphs with you guys beforehand. We looked at the carbon footprint of different countries, and I was surprised that the guys per capita, not just the absolute numbers, but per capita were at the highest level, but some of the Middle Eastern countries, like Qatar and places like that, which you found I was a bit surprised, I must confess. But the ones on the lower end are the ones that we think about as being quite, undeveloped, like Somalia, Chad, where would say a traditional accent is quite strong. So if you went to maybe the Emirates right now, they're very much, very blingy, very much, consumerism, whatever else you want to call it. Whereas maybe in those cultures, they're still quite living off the soil in many ways, but their confidence is quite low. And sometimes you feel as though the argument being put by people in terms of climate change is that we kind of harken back to a simple time. We harken back to a time before electronic devices, before, a car, before planes, and we walk everywhere. Maybe we take a horse everywhere instead of actually, using modern technology. And I think for me, that's where he came from there. It was just the case of saying, look, guys, realistically, what are you trying to do here? Do we really want to live in a thatched huts in the UK again? Do we really want to live in cobble roads again and have wagons that are driven by horses? Or do we not need to think, actually, guys, things are quite cushy right now. We live quite comfortably. We've got electricity, we've got clean water, we've got, okay, we could do better, we could be less, wasteful, granted. But overall, I think most people probably would say we prefer living how we do now than we did maybe a century or so ago, where you'd have to go to the local pond and get a bucket and take the water out. And it was very unsanitary and very unclean and very inconvenient. But I did find it a bit dramatic, and that's why I just thought I'd just flag it up. And the other thing for me was, it kind of was his viewpoint that maybe it was like another way to beat up the climate change, lobbyists. They harken back to this time, but no one wants to live in this time. And people that live maybe in countries where they're quite, you would say, maybe undeveloped, or they don't have those resources, they want to live in places where they have that, or they want that in their own country. So I think that was the reason why I kind of dragged it up there as an issue.
I think it was a bit.
Because go on.
I think what's interesting. Obviously, he's a US-based writer, but they do have that in the Amish community in Lancaster, in Pennsylvania County, in the USA. And I've seen it every time I've been to the States, because I've often visited there. It's a very simple lifestyle where it is basically no electricity, simple clothing. You help your neighbor, and it's in the USA. It's in such an advanced nation. So you do get, and they're not a insignificant part of the population. That's so you do get these sort of things, but I'm not sure the normal person walking around the UK knows about the Amish population in detail in the USA, but they do exist, in this sort of land, and they actually they've inculcated this sort of a simple lifestyle, but they've brought it back from their faith to do that. But maybe that's what we sometimes associate with other parts of the world, but it also exists in the Northern Hemisphere as well.
Well, some would argue that maybe we're a bit simple here in Lancashire as well, but that's another matter. But the kind of there is an aspect about for me that he kind of dragged it up purely because I think he feels strongly that an urban lifestyle is to be aspired towards, and rural lifestyles maybe aren't all the way that to be. Because I mean, obviously with COVID, people are kind of moved from cities towards living in villages and living in farmhouses and barns. But you wonder how long that lasts for. Because once they go there and they start to find that there's no nightlife there, or they can't just go out, quickly and stuff, would they still live there in 5-10 years' time? I don't know, but they might do. But there's something that just about in terms of COVID times as well. I'm cautious of the time. So what I'll do is, do you guys want to give your ratings or final thoughts on the ratings there? Go on, Mahan, you go first.
So I didn't know what to expect, to put it bluntly. I guess looking at the thickness of the book was daunting enough as it was, but because that clearly broke our book rule. but at the same time, I'm kind of glad we broke that book rule, because it was a thoroughly enjoying book. It made you reflect. So good choice there. And I don't know if I can give it 5, but it's certainly 4.5 out of 5.
Oh wow,
So
okay.
I
Impressive.
thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you, Mahan. For him, you can go on next. Well.
Yeah, great book. I'd happily read more of his books. Gripping thriller type book, as we said. I like the dialogue. I don't want to spoil it for the viewers of this, because there are so many different quotations. I mean, you obviously mentioned the Gulf Stream environmentalists, but there's so many. The way he uses alliteration, the liberal limousines and so on. I like that. And also buying integrity. Very rich sort of visualization of certain things. I know there's a lot of imagery that we talked off air about as well. So there's a lot that you're left with after you've read the book, and I can see why it's got a lot of appeal to a certain part of the population as well, and the climate change group. But yeah, I'm giving it 4 out of 5, and that's because Zubair, I leave 5 for the ones that have completely changed my life, which you've done previously with a different book. So how can I give it 5? But yeah, definitely an easy 4 out of 5.
I'm flattered with my choices already. Go on, Ray. Do you want to give your rating?
I can easily give it a 5. Having read it the second time, and I think about when I read it the first time, it got me very interested and reading around the topic and questioning things and listening to all sorts. So I think it's a really important book. I think a lot more people should read it. Yeah, definitely a 5.
Well, that's the highest rating so far, I think, from the book club. So I'm going to finish on that note and pass it on to Mehran for, I think I would say a state of fear to Mehran.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, what's your ratings about?
I'd give it a 5, obviously, because I chose it.
Okay. No, well,
I know I've read it twice, like Ria has, and when I read it eons ago, I really enjoyed it. But I'm a Crichton fan, so I would say that anyway. But I think the book was really well written, and it did spot for me the Caesar doubt of climate change when I read it. I must confess, when I first read the book, God, many years ago. So that's why I would give it a 5, because it made you think, and like very much, it did change my life, obviously, but it made me think deeply about what I'm thinking about, and that's always a good thing from a good book.
Yeah, no, I think you've converted a few of us to potentially being techno thriller enthusiasts. So, so let's say there's obviously Prey. There's a whole host of books, because this is the 14th book in his list of novels, isn't it? And it's obviously released more since then. But yeah, from State of Fear to In Place of Fear by Nye Bevan. That's the plan. I don't think we intended it to happen that way, But you know, if you don't know, he was the health and housing minister post World War II of the Labour Party from the Wales area. So it's a fascinating book. He's got some great insights. Everyone thinks he's going to just talk about NHS, but it's actually not. He talks about poverty, property, and democracy. So there's lots of very, very important themes that are still relevant today. So hopefully, end in November.
Thank you, Mehran. And Fahim, a quick word on the future direction of book club?
Yeah, so obviously we do this on the last Sunday. We try to 8 to 9 p.m. online, but hopefully we are trying to do a monthly physical meetup as well in Lancashire. So hopefully once we get that started in December, we can share that with those who are following. And if you're around there, maybe you want to join us for a cake and a coffee in a cafe coming to you very, very, very soon.
Thank you, guys. Just a quick way to say thank you to all the three of you for your insights and thoughts, and have a good evening. And thank you for the viewers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, cheers now. Bye.